Hey everybody, today I want to talk about collecting our own live rock and live woodwork from local sources, streams, rivers, ponds, the side of the road, your backyard, wherever. I've collected rocks and woodwork from all over the place, and in fact, the vast majority of just about everything I've got in all of my tanks, including those massive pieces of wood that are in my 125 gallon New World tank, all of that stuff was collected by myself. Only the very first few pieces of woodwork that I ever put in any of my tanks were purchased at a store. From then on, I've always collected it myself. I prefer to do it that way because it's more fun. I can find exactly what I want, and considering that most of my tanks are sort of geared around recapitulating my own natural experience around here, it only makes sense to collect the wood and the rocks that I would find around here in my local sources anyway. And so when I started doing my YouTube channel and I started shooting videos of me going out and collecting rock and collecting woodwork, I got a lot of grief and a lot of flack from people about not sterilizing it and all of the dangers of what I was going to be bringing home and putting in my tank. And I always kind of, you sort of take it on faith that, yeah, I guess I could be bringing home who knows what. But every time I've sat down and tried to think about what, I just can never really come up with anything that's particularly scary that I'm worried about wiping out a tank, especially if it's a tank that I'm just establishing and just setting up. It doesn't have any fish in it yet. I recently brought home a couple of rocks on the spur of the moment, and I put them in a 20-gallon tank that I'm cycling in. And likewise, I did not sterilize them or anything. All I did was sort of rinse them off and get sort of the grunge and the dirt and stuff off. And any, animals that are living on it, I don't know what they are, but around here there's a little type of insect larvae or nymph or something that builds little houses out of sand and sort of glue and basically makes little almost like igloo shapes out of sand, and it lives inside of this. And I always rub those off and knock those loose in the stream and leave them behind and whatever. But I basically just bring home the live rock. It's got all the bacteria growing all over it. It's got the algae on it. It's got cyanobacteria on it, I'm sure. I see that green cyanobacteria growing outside all over the place, everywhere from my yard to the woods to the bottom of the stream to the reservoir. Cyanobacteria is just ubiquitous. So I don't think bringing that home on those rocks would make any difference. If I had never brought rocks home from the outside, I'm still pretty sure I'd have cyanobacteria in my tanks just because we're down here in my basement and that's just the way it is. As far as algae, the same thing goes. You can have the most sterile tank ever, and if you've got enough light and nutrients and stuff, algae will just start growing in it. It's in the air. It's going to get in your tank eventually. So bringing home some algae on the rocks is not a big deal. There is the possibility that you could bring home ick, but it's a slim possibility. And again, if you are, if your tank's empty, ick is a host-dependent parasite. So if there's no fish in the tank, within a few days of hatching out of its cyst or its reproduction cycle, which is how you'd be bringing it home if any was stuck to the rocks or the woodwork you brought home and they hatched out in your tank, as long as there's no fish in there, after a few days, they'd all die off. So ick wouldn't be a problem. If you did have fish in the tank and you did infect it with ick, ick's still really not a problem. If you catch it early enough and you know what you're doing, ick's just kind of a nuisance. It's not that big a deal. Where you run into issues is where you run into something called epistolis, which looks very much like ick, but has a different life cycle, a different treatment plan, and that can be problematic. It seems like you just have this unkillable ick, and it's not ick. I've had that issue before, but again, this is not relevant to bringing anything home because that epistolis or epistylus, however you pronounce that, is in our tanks anyway. And the same goes for columnaris. Columnaris is another one that you could bring home, but you've probably already got it in your tank. So bringing it home, having it in your tank already, again, these aren't things that concern me. And so the list just goes on. I'm sure there's things out there that I don't know about. I'm sure there's bacteria or possible intestinal internal parasites that might get into the fish. But as far as like insect larvae and bugs and stuff, that's just going to be fish food. Microfauna the stuff that we refer to as off-walks or biofilm. That's a mishmash of little microcrustaceans, microworms, algae, cyanobacteria, all kinds of stuff growing in there. That's like a stew of life. And I want that in my tanks. I'd love to have pods, you know, copepods growing in my tanks, and you can catch them in your local streams or wherever and bring them home on rocks. And I've never had them. Well, I've had them, but I've never been able to maintain them or grow them enough. They just get eaten so quickly. They're just a great food source. So again, I don't know what there is to really worry about with bringing this stuff home. I'm not saying there's not anything to worry about. I'm just saying I don't know what it is, and I'm not recommending you do this. I'm simply saying this is how I do it. If you see the way my tanks are managed and you think they look terrible, then don't do what I do. And what I do is I go collect rocks and woodwork and stuff from my yard, from the streams, wherever. I give them a good rinse and I put them in my tank. And as I was saying, when I started my YouTube channel and people saw me doing this, they were, you know, pulling their hair out, the fact that I was doing this. I was going to destroy all my tanks and so on and so forth. And so I sort of went through the motions of kind of pretending to clean the stuff. I'd scrub it down with a scrub brush and spray it with hydrogen peroxide, and you know, that was more to appease the YouTube crowd than it was to really accomplish anything, because that doesn't sterilize anything the way I was doing it. And when it came to woodwork, anything larger than, you know, a small stick that I could put in a pan full of boiling water, you know, that was just going to get scrubbed down with a brush and a hose, just again to get the dirt and stuff off of it. But that doesn't sterilize it by any means. It certainly doesn't get even all the algae off of it. You know, algae is a single-celled organism. As long as there's single cells of algae left on that piece of wood, or cyanobacteria is the same way, you know, I can scrub that stuff till I'm blue in the face and it's just not going to sterilize it in those terms. And so I never have. But by going through those motions, it seemed to make everybody happy that I was cleaning this wood and cleaning these rocks and everything before I put them in my tank. And that was it. I stopped getting grief about it. And so I've just kind of not really said much about it. And I've been watching a few videos lately from Father Fish. I generally don't give shout outs on my channel as a rule of thumb. I had some issues way back in the early days about, you know, just whatever. As a rule of thumb, I generally don't mention people by name. I generally don't give shout outs or whatever, but occasionally I will. And Father Fish is one of those channels that I like to try to keep up on when I get a chance. And he's been talking a lot lately about this very thing, bringing home live wood and bringing home, he's even talking about bringing home like mulch and leaf litter and putting that in your tank for the purposes of bringing home the denitrifying bacteria and bringing home this sort of natural pre-cycled material into your tank. It goes almost perfectly with what I've been playing around with and experimenting with lately, and it kind of inspired me to shoot this video. I've been wanting to talk about this for a while anyway, because I am about to go get some really cool wood that I found, and we're going to be putting it in my 55 over there. And again, you're going to see my whole process. We're going to go get it. You're going to see where it's lying on the side of the reservoir. We're going to bring it home. I'm going to rinse it off in my hose, and it's going to go right in the tank. And you're going to see how it doesn't destroy my tank. It's just not going to cause any problems for me or anything like that. So again, if you're interested in following along with this kind of stuff, make sure you're subscribed. I'd also recommend going and checking out Father Fish's channel. I'm sure most of you are already familiar with him anyway, but if you're not, his channel is definitely worth checking out. I'll put a link down below. If you're not familiar with him, you can just check out that link and go look at the videos he's talking about. He's got scads more years of experience than me and does this professionally, and he's got the science and the dedication and everything behind it, whereas I just like to sort of mess around and tinker with stuff for my own purposes. If you want some good information, go check out some of his videos and you'll get a lot more detailed information about how all this kind of stuff works. But that's my thoughts on you know, collecting live rock and collecting live wood and whatnot. I'm not necessarily doing it for the live aspect of it. I'm not necessarily doing it to cycle my tank in, but I do want to bring home the living cultures. I want to bring home that pre-established offlux that's on these rocks and on these woodwork. In fact, way back in the day, before I started breeding my own snails, I used to go across the street every day with a baggie and a net and my fingers, and I would collect up snails and bring them home to feed my pufferfish butterbean. And occasionally I'd throw them in some of my other tanks where I have loaches, I have crayfish, I throw the snails in the crayfish tanks. And I used to do that every day. I'd go over to the stream, and again, it was people on YouTube told me to stop doing that. You never know what you're going to bring home. You could get some snail that's infected, and that's true. And in addition to that, it's just easier to have a stable source, and of course the winter comes along, and so long ago I started breeding my own snails. But the snails that I'm breeding all started from snails I brought home from the stream years ago, and so here we are countless generations of snails later, and I'm still breeding those same snails to feed my fish, and they were all collected naturally and wild again. So again, those are my 2 cents. I'd really be interested to hear your thoughts about this, whether you do this stuff or not, whether you think it's a bad idea, whether you've had bad experiences with it or not. So leave a comment down below. Don't forget, I have started a new channel. We're going to do all my outdoor stuff on my different channel. I will put a link down below to that as well. It's called Dan's Outdoors and More. So check that out if you like my yard tours and my kayaking videos and that kind of stuff. So from now on, all of my fish videos are going to be here, and this channel is going to be 100% fish keeping oriented from now on. So make sure you're subscribed. You won't miss anything I got coming up. Don't forget to check out my other channel. Subscribe over there. Thanks for watching. I'll see you real soon in the next one.